in DC. He's in DC.
All right, welcome everyone to the August 15th, 2011 school committee meeting. Tonight is a special session where our sole purpose of gathering is to interview Dr. Phil Auger. We will start off with our regular standing and saying the pledge of the flag, and we'll take the roll call, and then we'll go into the questions. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States
of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lorene, if you could call the roll.
Sure. Linda Avanzato. Here. Melvoy Benson.
Present.
Larry Cerisi. William Mudge.
Here.
Kimberly Page.
Here.
Joe Thompson. Richard Welch.
Here.
Julia Held. Here. Thank you.
Yes, Mrs. Avanzato was just asking me if I could let everyone know that the reason Mr. Cerisi is not here is because he's about ready to have another back operation. And I know the reason Mr. Thompson isn't here is he has been on a vacation with his grandchildren, and he's out of state. All right. Tonight, as I said, is our sole purpose is to come here to interview Dr. Phil Auger. So we'll go ahead and get started with that almost right away. Just to remind the committee that after this meeting, I would like to have a short executive session just so that we can discuss the interview and how we're going to proceed from here. And we won't be taking any votes, okay? It'll just be merely just to talk about with our attorney as to what's the next step in the process. So we'll go ahead and get started here, and basically what I'd like to do is we'll just continue to go each down the line, one after another, to ask a question. If you see that the question that you are to give next is not worded very well, feel free to change around the wording to ask something along the same lines, but I'm not going to be so rigid that you have to read the exact question off the piece of paper. So. And even if you jump ahead, just let everybody that you know that you were jumping ahead to a question so we can all mark it off, okay? So with that being said, I'll go ahead and start off with the first question for Dr. Auger, and that is, please provide a brief recap of your background and experience.
Okay. Well, first I'd like to thank you all for even having me here on the stage tonight to have a chance to do this with you. I'll try to make my answers brief. I know that's an important thing. As I've been just told. Okay, but to give you a recap, I've been an educator for 24 years. To go even a little further back than that, I grew up in Woonsocket. I was a product myself of Catholic schools in Woonsocket. I was a graduate of Mount St. Charles Academy. And from there I went to Providence College, where I have a bachelor's degree in English from there. Following that, I was an English teacher at Bishop Hendricken High School for 3 years, while my wife attended graduate school to get her MSW. Once she completed that, I went back to school, and I have a PhD in English from the University of Rhode Island. For those 5 years, I was a full-time student and a teacher of college-level courses for freshmen and sophomores at URI in English. Once I had my doctorate, my next job was working at the Newport Naval Base in a program called BOOST. Stands for Broadened Opportunity for Officer Selection and Training, and that is a program for officers, for enlisted people in the Navy and Marines, and they have an opportunity to become officers by doing well in this program, where they have kind of a hybrid course in English and social studies. They also take science and math, and if they do well enough, they become officers. After a few years doing that work, I started having an interest in public school administration. I made sure that my certificate was up to date, and I started working at Attleboro High School as an English teacher. 3 years after that, I got my first administrative job at Charahoe High School, where I started as a disciplinarian, and there was a reorganization similar to the one that I just advocated for a week ago here, in which we had teacher deans at the high school, and my role became the assistant principal for teaching and learning. At that point, That's when I first met Dr. Thornton. He was the curriculum director and assistant superintendent in Charahoe. And so when the position for assistant superintendent came here in North Kingstown, it became very desirable to me for a number of reasons to go in that direction. For one thing, this is my town. I've been living here for 16 years, and my own two kids have been in this district ever since kindergarten. My oldest, Jim, is in the 11th grade, and Emily is going into the 9th grade this year. So I have a good familiarity with the school system, with many of the schools, as they've been, with all the reorganizations at the elementary level, they've gone to many of them between the two of them. And working with Phil Thornton for the last 2 years has been great, and being a part of this district that, is my hometown now, and it's just been a wonderful experience. And so, that's what's brought me to this point.
Mr. Welch.
Well, I think you answered question number 2, which is why are you interested in the position of superintendent, unless you'd like to elaborate further.
Yeah, I could go a little bit. It's not simply because I happen to have been the assistant superintendent. That does play into it. When you become an assistant superintendent, you start to think, okay, for one reason or another, it may turn out that I'm asked or that I should seek the position of superintendent, whether in this district or another one. And, when I first started, I certainly learned a lot. I think I knew the position of assistant superintendent pretty well from the time that I had worked with Dr. Thornton in Charahoe, because my job, although it was dealing exclusively with the high school, was certainly similar to his in terms of the kinds of work that we had to do, types of grants that we would oversee, presentations that we would make, professional development experiences that we would work on. We always did a lot of that together. So I knew that pretty well. In the last 2 years, I've had a real education in terms of, this end of the work, the superintendency, which is much broader than that. It includes all of those things, but it also includes overseeing a budget, working with the school committee, working on a much broader base in terms of public relations. And, I think I have a talent for that, to tell you the truth. And I like the idea of giving presentations. I don't mind being in front of a group of people and talking about the good things that are going on in this district. I think it needs to happen more often. One of the goals that I have in becoming superintendent, should that be the case, is that I would want to be out in front celebrating the good things that are going on in this district. I think that is the number one way to convince the people of this community to give us their support. I love this community. I've been living here for 16 years, or just about 16 years now. We love everything about it. My family is very much involved in the community in lots of ways, not just in the school system. And so I feel like, something has put me in the right place at the right time. I feel like I'm prepared professionally for it. It's a job that interests me. It's a community that I love, and so that's why I think this works for me right now.
Mrs. Avanzato.
Okay, I'll go in order. What would you consider your most significant accomplishment, and why?
Well, in the last 2 years being here, working with Dr. Thornton, I feel like I have done a nice job in reorganizing our school district to be more focused on teaching and learning. And I'll give you a few, for instances. When I came here, while we had curriculum leadership at the high school in terms of department heads, we really didn't have an assistant principal for teaching and learning at the high school, and we didn't have curriculum coordinators at any level other than the high school. So we also didn't have professional days that were organized in such a way for groups of people to work together. All the learning that I have done as an educator, has convinced me that the best way that school systems work is when people are working in collaboration with one another. I don't believe teachers or administrators or any of us working in this profession necessarily need to be told by, outside people how to do our job better. Sometimes that helps, no doubt about it. The best way for us to learn is to work together. The best way for teachers to learn is to be clear about what they want their kids to know and be able to do, to ask questions all the time. How do I know that they're learning what I'm expecting them to learn? And the most important question is, what am I going to do for the kids who are not getting it? And when people are asking those questions together during regularly scheduled common planning time and professional days, that's a great thing. That's how we get better. And that culture is, I would say, it's built. All of the bones of that culture are in place. We have room to grow. There's no doubt about it. This is a long journey that we're on. But we have 4 professional days where those kinds of conversations that I just talked about are a regular part of every professional day. And there are people in place to lead those conversations. Conversations don't happen unless you have people assigned to and overlooking that on a regular basis. So for relatively small money that we already had in our budget under professional development, I was able to channel that to a whole group of coordinators who, it's not me. It's not me that's going to tell everyone what needs to be taught and how it needs to be taught. It's the people who are doing the work. And I think they appreciate the fact that they have a voice working collaboratively with one another to get themselves better. So that whole culture, that whole collaborative culture that's focused around teaching and learning on a regular basis using common planning time, using regularly scheduled professional days, I think is a huge help to this district, something I'm very proud of.
Mrs. Selden.
Thank you for allowing me to participate and ask a question. I think I will jump ahead to number 11. Approximately 200, a little more than that, I think, but of your high school students come from Jamestown. I would be very interested in hearing your views of the educational and financial benefits of a continuing relationship, and I am curious as to what you would do to improve the performance of the high school and continue to attract Jamestown students and revenue.
Sure.
That item 11 or 12?
11.
It's actually 12.
Oh, sorry, a list I
That's
printed
all
out.
right.
I printed it out away.
Okay. I want you to know that I very much value the relationship that we have with Jamestown. The Jamestown students, approximately 200 to 225 students in our high school, of a school of 1,600 students, really add a great deal to this culture. They participate in all of the courses that they take. They are part of our sports teams. They're part of our arts program. And they've made a lot of great relationships with North Kingstown students, and I think that's a plus right there. There's also a lot of resources that come with that as well. There's an agreement between North Kingstown and Jamestown that has been a very amicable one for several years, many years before I was even part of the scene at all. And I feel like it's a good thing for our district, that we gain a lot financially from this deal, that we are, and not only that, but we gain a lot in terms of the kinds of programs that we're able to run at our high school. And to give you for instance, if we have an AP course, or we have several AP courses at the high school, and we have a certain number of students in our school, and we actually benefit in our high school from the size of it. I think at first glance I'd feel like 1,600 is kind of a big high school, and I might want it to be a little bit smaller. But when you think about all of the opportunities, one of the best benefits of a larger high school is that it opens up opportunities. In a smaller school, for instance, say, if you compare us to, say, East Greenwich High School with 700 students, when they're scheduling courses, there are only so many students to register for every course given. So a lot of the singleton courses, for instance, a particular kind of an art class or a particular kind of AP history, where usually in a school one section of that runs. In a place like North Kingstown High School, there's a good chance that more than one section of that is going to run. And at the very least, you're going to get about 15 or 16 students to register for the course, and therefore it would run. as a high school scheduler in my former life, I would realize that if I were to get 12 or 13 to sign up for a course, I'd have to do a major sell with the superintendent about even running that course that year. I might have to wait a year to run it where more kids might be interested the following year. So there's a lot to be said about having a large high school where you can be guaranteed that you're going to have classes that fall into that zone. And, you know, having Jamestown students here really help us in that regard. So, you know, I feel that Jamestown adds a lot to this community. I think they help us. I know they help us. They come from a great program in Jamestown where they have some of the highest scores in the state that feed into our program, and that makes a lot of opportunities for our students when they're in the mix, and they help us to get better. So, you know, I'm looking to keep that alive.
Mrs. Benson.
I don't have a question, but I have, you may form it in the form of a question, but some of the questions listed on this sheet reflect some of the things that I'd like to say. And I would like to say this. With your experience, Dr. O'Jay, what would you do and how would you work to affect the attitudes of school committee members, teachers, citizens, and students believe in an open and positive way for our school committee, and mostly, especially, reflecting on financial support and views of the district within the community?
Okay. I feel very strongly that education is a business that is about relationships. And the superintendent is probably the first person where you want to have a good relationship with your community. I think that begins with being respectful toward the constituents of the community and toward everybody. And what I need to do as superintendent is to communicate well with people, to invite people to be a part of the process whenever possible, to respect their opinions. And, you know, that doesn't mean I'm necessarily always going to agree with everybody's opinion. But there are ways of going about those kinds of conversations where you take the time to invite people to be a part of the process, and people start to feel involved. And when they feel involved, they become supportive, even if they don't necessarily get what they want on a particular issue. They start to understand the process, and there's a respect built for it. What happens when that's shut down, when I've learned about the problems of leadership occur when you're not communicating, when you decide that you're going to go for the quick solution instead of the good solution or the best solution. I think what I need to focus on as superintendent is that building of relationships and that communicating. And sometimes that takes time, and more time. You know, I'm not the most patient person sometimes. And I think I need to learn that I need to be patient, and it's more important to bring people into the conversation and to listen to them, and maybe even not to get my own way right away, with the idea that down the road, you know, I have a vision, and that's what I'm going to work toward.
Mr. Mudge.
Thank you.
Dr. O'Jay, I'm very concerned, I guess 17, I'm going to spin off of 17. I'm very concerned about mandates and so forth and so on. You know, we got to spend money and do this and do that. And to that extent, the teacher evaluation is something that concerns me because, you know, they're putting a great demand on, I think, our school district, which has been a very high-achieving district as far as I'm concerned overall, and not that it's the only goal, but when you have 85% of your kids going to college, that's got to be some mark that something's going on right, okay?
I agree.
So, with that, this, I want to call it craziness, that, we got to go back and evaluate every teacher this year, or next year, or whatever. It's just, it's ludicrous to me, quite frank. But with that said, I would ask, do we have enough funding to do that through the state, or do you expect, and I think I'd asked you this question last meeting, is there going to be a significant requirement for the taxpayers in North Kingstown to quote, achieve the mandate of the state?
The evaluation system that you're talking about, for those of you who may not be aware of how this works, I'm going to be talking about this in an upcoming school committee meeting. We are being asked this year, under the new Race to the Top rules, if you will, that we evaluate all of our teachers with an instrument that is more time-consuming than the one we currently have. But under our current system, we roughly evaluate about 1/3 of our teachers per year. We're on a process in which a teacher would be evaluated in year 1, and if everything's going fine, they may not be evaluated for another 2 years. So this is going to require a lot more administrative time, and we are certainly worried about it. Now, with the Race to the Top, there is some funding, and originally that was offered to us in the form of intermediary service providers, ISPs. There were some problems with that at the State House, and so that program didn't really work the way it was originally designed by the Department of Education. Right now, just today, I've had some back and forth emails with members from RIDE, and the program that I'd like to put together here is to use that Race to the Top money to have substitute administrators come to our K through 8 schools. And what they would do is they would do the regular administrative business of the day that our principals would normally do. And they would be, that would allow the principals to be in classrooms more and to do the evaluation work, even if it's a lot of the paperwork that goes along with it, because there's plenty of that. So there's paperwork involved, there's meeting time with the teachers that they're evaluating, a good deal of it, and there's evaluation time to be in the class and actually doing the observing. And there are minimum standards for how much time needs to be spent on those kinds of things. So it's not the ideal, what I'm hoping to do, but this will get a lot of substitute administrative help, people who have already been administrators in this district who are retirees, to come and help us. Now, if there's a problem in the school that day that requires the principal to be a part of it, that may be a day where that principal had planned on doing evaluations and has a substitute administrator, but you need the principal at that point. So it's not going to be perfect, and I'm worried about it, and the principals are worried about it as well. The reorganizational plan that we just put together at the high school is going to allow Lynn Saronin to be a little bit more available to do evaluations, and the high school has department heads to help with observations. So they're a little bit more equipped, but at the same time, there are a lot more teachers here at the high school. So, yes, I am worried about it. For the first 2 years, I have roughly $60,000 of Race to the Top money each year to help us do this. After that, right now, there is not anything in place from RIDE. I am assuming, but you know what happens when you assume, I'm assuming that there'll be more of an intermittent kind of process where teachers who have a good evaluation may go 2 years without the next evaluation. But that has not been told to us yet. And there's also some evidence that that is not part of the plan, that it would be every teacher every year. And I'm assuming that even if it's that the time involved in the process may go down a little bit. But yes, I'm worried, and people are worried all around the state. So I'm not sure just yet, because we haven't gotten all of the details from RIDE yet about what this will mean. And so our administrators are great. They're going into this in a very positive way. We've met with the union and talked about all of the details that we are both learning at the same time. There are 4 modules of training just during the school year, and then a few days of training over the summer. after everyone's gone through this for a year, where they call the gradual implementation year. This is the first year of this. They don't call it a pilot, but a gradual implementation year, which means that it's a little bit less time intensive this year than it would be next year. So we're worried about it, but so far, people have had a very positive attitude about it, with a little bit of nervousness. The administrators are a little nervous about being able to get it done, and teachers are a little nervous about, what is it going to mean and how is it going to play out, and I can understand all that. Now, I think we're positioned pretty well right now to respond to both, but we're going to learn a lot, and I will keep you informed on that.
Do we have sufficient funding from the state?
Well,
is
we
that
have
TBD?
we have the funding that I feel we can get it done in the next 2 years. I don't know what's going to happen after that, and I say that with caution, because we're going to try this plan. I'm not 100% convinced that it's going to be the most effective, and I may need to look at other ways to provide more help as we go.
Thank you. Mr. Welch.
Since we're jumping around, I'd like to go to 15, which is, what is your experience in directly negotiating union contract?
I have been involved in negotiations for both the teachers' union and the ESP here in North Kingstown. So far, so good.
Mrs. Avanzato.
Okay, I will jump to one that I sent to Kim. Number 11. In these economic times, what kinds of out-of-the-box ideas can you utilize to help the school committee save money and still provide a quality education for our students?
I think this is probably the toughest question, and we all need to face this one. How do we make ends meet in a culture that it seems more and more depressing every year right now? Not the least of which the problems concerning the pension facing us for next year's budget. We're going to be hearing a lot more about that in the next school committee meeting. I have some ideas about the kinds of things that we can do. I don't have all of the ideas. I don't know if anybody does at this point. I think that we have to keep an open mind. I hope that we can avoid fighting with one another and fighting with the town and fighting and doing the infighting that our district sometimes does when we put out a list of here are the things that we need to cut back on. And I think that begins with a lot of communication, as I was saying before. I not only need to communicate, obviously, with the administrators of the district, the school committee, my business manager, but also with the town council, with the community about what is important. And I need to be aware of what's coming to us from the State House. I feel like we need to look at a lot of options, including outsourcing types of options. In this interview, I want to be out there saying that, because I feel that when we look at those kinds of things and we see that we can save hundreds of thousands of dollars, that's not something we can ignore, not right now. I think if we look at it and find that the savings are maybe marginal or maybe not much at all, as we have done in this district, and we realize, you know what, there is a benefit to having this as a homegrown program, because if we went another way, it really wouldn't make a difference too much in terms of the finances, then I think the benefits of staying homegrown help us. But if we're looking at differences of hundreds of thousands of dollars in a year where next year we may be having to find $1 million or $2 million to make budget, that's just something we can't ignore. One way or another, we have to make up that money. And part of my role as a superintendent is to help people to understand what a budget cut means. So I need to be clear with, say, the community or the town council that if we're coming in, we don't get the funding that we need to get, that it's going to mean certain things. And whenever the people of our community talk about, well, we shouldn't cut this, we should cut that, there's always a trade-off. If we're not cutting one thing, we're cutting something else. And I think sometimes the arguments that we've had in this room have been with the idea that we either cut this or we don't cut anything at all, and that's just not the case. If we don't cut in this area, there's got to be something else that we have to cut, because the budget won't just balance itself. So it's making people understand that, and it's trying to gather some goodwill from people to understand the complexity of these issues. They're not always just so simple as either we cut this or we don't cut it. There's usually a lot more involved. So.
I'll ask number 14, or a variation. Dr. Auger, what areas of service do you see as potential cooperation between the town and the schools?
Well, I see, off the top of my head, I see some opportunities, for instance, in IT. I think that there are areas there where, whether they be servers, telephone lines, or infrastructure kinds of things, there are probably some relatively easy areas, don't affect the functioning of either the town or the school district, that we could definitely look into and find some solutions. What I'm worried about in terms of consolidating moves and working with the town is where we need to be mindful that there are lots of the inner workings of both of these institutions that need to stay the same, not necessarily stay the same way that they are, but we need to acknowledge that, for instance, I don't want to go so far down the road of, say, an IT consolidation plan where I'm worried about getting an approval from someone at the town in order to do some quick repairs that need to be done. I need to be responsive in this district. If there's a server down, if there are computer problems in a building, if there are phone line problems, if there's any kind of communication problems along those lines, I need to be able to respond to that with the IT staff that are here and people who answer to me, because you're going to hold me accountable for those kinds of things. So I need to have people who, are going to work for me, and nothing against anyone of the town, but I don't feel like I should have to talk to the town, say Mike Embry, about getting clearance to get an IT repair, just like he wouldn't want to be calling me to figure out how to fix something at the firehouse. It's none of my business. He can oversee that. So when we look into these plans, I'm all for them. What I want to make sure that we're doing is that we keep the autonomy of the school district intact, and that we have the power to make sure that we can oversee what we need to oversee.
Thanks. Mrs. Houghton.
I remember you gave a presentation about the state assessments that raised some perfectly reasonable and logical concerns about the measurement methods
Yes.
of some of the statistics. But I would like to ask number 6, what areas, given those concerns, what areas that you see any deficiencies in performance on the state assessments would you particularly like to address?
Sure. Well, one area in particular that I don't know if I would say I'm worried about it, but it is the lowest area in terms of our scores, and that is science. We can certainly do better on the state assessment in science. As I've stated at school committee meetings before, the top high school in the state, for instance, right now, had 51% of their students proficient in science. So I think there's a lot for all of the state to learn about what is on that science assessment, and we're part of that. We need to do a better job of working toward what's being assessed. But at the same time, and the meeting that we were talking about that, I remember, ironically, we were acknowledging the award that one of our teachers had gotten for her outstanding work teaching advanced science courses here at our school. And so we have a number of students who are doing fantastic work in science and going to some of the greatest science colleges in the country coming from North Kingstown. So it's not necessarily that the science we're doing is bad science, but in some cases it's not necessarily aligned with the state test. We have students who take biology, then they take earth science, biology, and then either physics or chemistry. The state test has earth science, biology, physics, and chemistry. So we have a curriculum issue to deal with, and our science department is dealing with that. And we all, and as I explained at our last school committee meeting, we're also making some moves right now to pilot a program out of New Jersey in which students would ultimately, once we get there, be taking physics in the 9th grade. And that physics would then inform the chemistry that they would take in the 10th grade and the biology that they would then take in the 11th grade. And everything would be ramped up. And everything that we have learned about this program is that students are at a far higher rate, 25 times the rate of the average school in New Jersey. At these schools, they're taking AP Physics at 25 times the rate. And that's the kind of gauge that I'm looking for. The person who came to North Kingstown to talk to us about this program was the Teacher of the Year in New Jersey and now leads the Center for Teaching and Learning. And he knew us because it was the same year that Dr. Morse from the high school became the Teacher of the Year. So they struck up a relationship and talked about what they were doing in their own states with one another, and she became very enamored with this particular program and invited him to come and talk with me and other people in our program. And if it is anything close to what we have learned, we're going to advance a great deal. But I'm not so worried about advancing so much on the state test. That's something that for PR purposes we need to do. You know, I think it's important that the community sees us doing well. We get that list that comes in the Providence Journal all the time about where everybody ranks in terms of the state test. But what he has done is he said, where is our school in terms of international benchmarks? What kind of science and math would get our students to be up there with Singapore and Finland and all the countries that we always hear are doing so well? And what he did is he said, for that kind of a gauge, you need to be looking at the AP program. AP Physics is the course for him that he says, if you take that course, you're in that upper echelon of countries. If you pass that course, pass that test with a 3 or to a 5, you are best in the world. That's where he began, not on a particular state test. So his students are doing better on the New Jersey state test, but they're also doing much better. And they have, in his school, in sophomore year, kids are taking AP Physics. If your average high school has 3 kids taking it, his school is 75. That's the rate. And it's just a matter of course. And that program is one, again, where teachers are working together to create the lesson plans. They're using technology. They're using an approach that they've shown works. Why would you try anything else? Teachers are not left on their own to create lesson plans. And it's working out great. So we had 4 of our teachers, 2 in math and 2 in science, go and train with his teachers this summer. We're starting to do that work with the kids who are taking physics in the 11th grade, and we're going to assess it this year and look to see if it's a move that we want to make where we would start to channel our resources toward physics in the 9th grade. A lot of things involved in that, but that would be an area in particular. Not that math and English are something we're ignoring, but that would be, that for right now, that's our lowest kneecap area is science right now. So that's a good place to go.
Mrs. Benson.
Mine is related to number 20, and must compliment those who sent their questions, because we great minds all think together, and mine are very much similar to those. As a school committee member, for me, parents and teachers, senior citizens, which is often referred to as empty nesters with no kids in school, are we going, from your philosophy, and what you have stated, you say you are working toward a learning-based community, which is very good, in my opinion, as a citizen and a member of the community. Because a learning-based community knows and respects education. when it is done openly and with transparency. Because I think that all people know that education is the one thing that has built our country, and it will still continue to be. So what do you need from us as school committee members to help you ask of us to do in order to help your plans be a success?
Well, thank you for asking that question. What I need from you is for your support on everything I ask you to do. I'm just kidding about that. I need you to trust me, and I think we need to trust one another. And what I mean by trust is not simply give me the keys to the kingdom and let me run loose, but it means let me know what you need me to do, listen to my vision of how things need to go, and hold me accountable to getting that done. In every area, whether it's in evaluating our teachers or our paraprofessionals, or evaluating the programs we have in terms of buildings and grounds, sports, those are things that ultimately I have to oversee as superintendent. And I think what I need from the school committee more than anything else is the trust that you will give me to do the management of this district, and then to hold me accountable for that. I think that we often get so involved that it becomes, sometimes it feels like there are 7 or 8 managers of the district. And no offense to anybody, but that's what you pay me for. And I'm happy to do that. And so if you feel like there is a problem where someone comes to you and says, I've got a problem with a teacher or an administrator, or the way that bus is being run, or the way that program that building is being built or maintained, I would appreciate your letting me know that and allowing for me to do that kind of an investigation, and I will be back to you as soon as I know for sure. But just to be fair, and not to, jump to conclusions right away, but let me know. I promise you, I will check into those kinds of things, and I will get back to you in a fair way that isn't, I need to be mindful of that, I'm dealing with personnel issues when those kinds of things come up, when people have their job performances judged, whether it's just by a concerned citizen or a parent or a student in the community. And so I need to be fair about how I go about those things. But if you have concerns, please allow me to take those as my responsibility and see them through. And, I think that's what I need more than anything else.
Thank you.
Mr. Mudge.
I had a similar question. I'd like just to expand that just for discussion. Do you feel, as coming into this district with respect to the support from the school committee, that you have any philosophical differences with the committee itself in terms of education? Are we on the same page right now, do you think?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think, I think that no matter who is sitting up on this stage, there are going to be times when I agree with some of the opinions, and sometimes I'm going to disagree. And you will all agree and disagree with one another from time to time. And I think just in the 2 years that I've been here, I've seen just about every kind of voting pattern going on. Sometimes there's a block on one side and a block on the other, and sometimes there's kind of a mix. I think everybody comes into this job with the best of intentions. They want what's good for the kids of North Kingstown, and they also want to do this in a way that is respectful of the taxpayers of North Kingstown. And we're going to do this in a way that is going to get us a great school system, but do it very efficiently. We all want that. I want that. I'm a taxpayer myself, and I don't want to be paying any more taxes than I have to be. But I also, I think my first goal in that equation is making sure that this program is as good as it gets. And I understand I have to work within certain resources for that. But to answer your question, I don't feel like anybody on this committee is out for anything other than the good of our kids. And I'm willing to work with that.
Mr. Welch.
Yes, thank you. Dr. O'Shea, this year here, we were fortunate enough to get special dispensation from RIDE to send some of our youngsters over to Newport for vocational education.
Yes.
In these times and this economy, et cetera, and the people having difficulty affording a college education, plus the real need in our economy for people with vocational talents, where do you see us proceeding, going down this road for vocational education in our community?
In my first 2 years as superintendent, as assistant superintendent, excuse me, I've done a lot to focus on creating a culture for teaching and learning, as I've explained. And even before I learned of Dr. Thornton, seeking, the job in Cumberland, I was already starting to think long and hard, partially based on presentations that were made here with partnerships in the northern part of town of Quonset, and looking at career and tech kinds of opportunities, career paths. It always surprised me that North Kingstown doesn't have a career and tech center. Not that I can produce one tomorrow morning. We have good partnerships with Coventry and Newport. We need to advertise them better, and we need to get more kids involved in that. And wherever possible, we need to start looking at some partnerships in our own town. Quonset Point has unbelievable opportunities with EB, Torrey, and other industries up there that so many towns in the state would love to have. And the fact that we don't have solid partnerships where we're sending lots of kids over to them to work with them, I think we're missing an opportunity. I'm not sure how to make that happen. But it is certainly something that I have a goal this year of pursuing, of starting to make those partnerships, of talking with the right people. I know there are some people in our system, in our guidance program, Martha Pugh, for instance, with our Links program, who have already started down that road, and I think that that's an area that we really need to look more into. The goals that I've had in the last few years haven't been so focused on those. But even now that we have expanded to the fact that students have an opportunity to go to Newport, where they can do part of their day in North Kingstown, and they like that better because they keep their North Kingstown identity but still get a career and tech experience, that's not solving all the issues. There are more kids, I'm sure, from North Kingstown who could benefit from a career and tech experience, but that idea of traveling to another town for their schooling just isn't working for them. And so we have relatively few students who are taking advantage of this right now. And so as superintendent, I really want to make it a focus to try to find ways to expand this, whether it's through doing better advertising of the programs and the partnerships we already have in place, or creating new ones in our own town that would work for kids.
Mrs. Avanzato.
Yes, my question is kind of based off of question 8. And that says, what experience and what success have you had with special education students? But I kind of want to ask it as, how will you sharpen the focus and all of our attention on special education students and special education programs?
Sure. Well, I'm really happy with, and I'm not simply taking credit for this myself, this district has had a good program in special education for some years now, and a lot of the credit goes to Rachel Santa and to the special educators of this district. I showed you some statistics earlier this year where we have made remarkable gains in special education in just the last couple of years in the test scores that the students on that level are having. The program that I talked to you about earlier with professional development is not necessarily geared toward special education, but just any students who are challenged by our curriculum and may not be having the easy time of learning what they need to learn. If we're doing what we need to do, we have a response to intervention program in place, RTI. And that means that whether you have an IEP or you have a 504 or any kind of program, or whether you don't have one of those programs, that there is going to be there are going to be people in our schools who are going to look out for you. If you're not doing well, your teacher's going to be aware of that and going to be working with teams of people at the high school to make sure you're getting the attention that you need. One of the interviews last week, a woman was talking about how she was frustrated because she felt like her son was not getting the attention that he needed, and she saw the gateway to that as, I need to get an IEP for my son, and they're saying he's not eligible for an IEP. You don't need to be eligible for an IEP to get attention.
Thank you.
And we're doing, I think we do probably a better job of that at the elementary level. There's been more training, and there's a little bit more further along the line at the elementary level of doing this thing called RTI, where you identify kids who are behind in their learning and responding in a systematic way to help them. But we're doing a lot at the middle school now and at the high school as well, and I see that growing. And we're seeing better scores. The fact that our special education scores are moving up in the direction they are is not only testimony to the good work of our special educators, but also of all of our teachers, because all of our teachers have these kids. They're in all of the classes. And so those questions that I talked about in our professional development, what is it you want kids to be able to learn? How do you know they're getting it? And the third one, what are you going to do for them if they don't get it? That's the toughest question in education. And it's only been really in the last 10, 20 years through some of the professional development that we've been focused on. I've taken some people to a school, and Mr. Welch came as well, to a school in Chicago called Adlai Stevenson High School, one of the greatest high schools in the United States in terms of the achievement of their students. And their principal has written books on those three questions and organizing to focus on what are we doing for the kids who aren't getting it? How are we responding to those kids? And there's a million different answers to that question. But it involves a culture where you're built to work with those kids. It doesn't happen by chance because you just happen to have a good teacher this year. It has to be every year I'm going to have a teacher. Doesn't matter who my teacher is. First-year teacher, veteran teacher, doesn't matter. In this school, when a student is falling behind, here's how we notice it, and here's what we do about it when it happens. And it's a team effort. The principal's involved, other teachers are involved, guidance counselors, social workers, psychologists. We're going to figure out what the problem is, and we're going to do something to address it. It's not easy, but you need to be organized for that, and I think that our school district is getting better in that regard every year.
Great. I'll ask number 5, or a variation. Dr. Ajay, you've just talked about dealing with parents and how that could sometimes be very stressful. How do you go about dealing with that angry parent or the angry group who comes to your office? And
I have my secretary deal with that person.
What are the communication techniques you use?
I think what an angry parent wants more than anything else is to be listened to.
That's correct.
And if that's not happening, you're dead in the water. I recall one of my I remember this very vividly. When I was first an assistant principal, I went to a professional development day that involved Dave Abbott. Dave Abbott is now the Deputy Commissioner of Education, and at the time he was an attorney for a few school districts, and he was talking about special education law. And he talked about, and he was talking to a lot of special education directors and administrators, and he said, if you want to avoid litigation in your district, the first thing you need to do is listen to people. And you need to let them know that you're taking them seriously. You're not necessarily going to come out of this agreeing with them, but if they understand that you care about the welfare of their kid just like they do, that's going to go a long way. And if you're not responding to their email, if you're taking your time about those kinds of things, or if you have a smirk on your face and you come right out right from the beginning and look like you don't believe a word they're saying about the whole thing, that's not going to sit well for you. It's a lot of common sense kind of things, being respectful of other people, giving them the time. As a superintendent, just in these past 2 weeks, I got to tell you, I cannot believe how packed my schedule is, and it's only August. I'm not even in the school year. but things take time. And those, when I talk about there's nothing more important than relationships, there is nothing more important than relationships, and relationships take time. You've got to sit down and talk with people and let them know that you understand what they're trying to say. And they need to hear from you that you do understand that. You need to almost repeat back to them what they told you, just to make sure that you're getting it, that you hear them. And then let's talk about some solutions. The other day, for instance, in that interview, even within the interview, Rachel Santa happened to be sitting there, and we were talking about, I feel like even within the context of that interview, that the woman that I was talking to really felt like there were some options that we could work with, and Rachel met with the parent right after the interview, and I think she's already starting to feel better about the kinds of things the district can do for her that she wasn't totally aware of before, and she's talking to the right people. And we can make some things happen. But it took her to come forward and present that, and took us to be able to listen, take the time to listen, and to put the right people in front of her to help her out.
Mrs. Howard.
I guess I have a question. It's sort of a follow-up to the one asked about the evaluations, and then number 18, which is when you're visiting a classroom, what tells you that there's really good instruction going on, and accepting your financial and logistical concerns with the new teacher evaluation model, were you satisfied with the old model of evaluating teachers, and do you think that a new format is important on an educational level?
Okay. I'll start with the first part of that question. When I walk into a classroom, it doesn't matter which level I'm walking into. What I want to see are engaged students. That's the first thing that tells me something's clicking here. I've been in a lot of situations as an evaluator where a teacher would say to me, well, the kids were doing a lot of the work today, but I think you wanted to come in on a day where I'm doing more of the chalk and talk from in front of the room. And couldn't be the opposite. I think there's room for being in front of the room and doing direct instruction, demonstrating ideas, whether you're using the chalkboard or any other smart board. But when I know that kids are learning is when they're doing the work and when they're explaining the work to one another. And there are ways of doing that you can get a lot of bang for your buck. It doesn't have to be that we're going to go one at a time and everyone's going to come up in front of the room and demonstrate an equation on the board. That takes a lot of time, and you really only get one kid talking at a time. The classes that, when I was doing my best teaching at Attleboro High School, I was a team teacher, and I was teaching 11th grade American Studies. It was kind of a pilot at the school, and I was working with a social studies teacher, and they were learning American history that year, and I was teaching American literature. Shouldn't we be teaching these two things together? So we organized it so we had a double class. We had 40-plus kids in the room at a time, and we had them sitting at round tables. And it forced us as teachers to make our activities in such a way that if we were talking for 2 hours in front of the room, it was done. They're bored in 10 minutes. This is the glazed eyes I'm seeing around the table right now. I'm just kidding. But if you got to get people up and doing things. And so it forced us to have a lot of activities where kids were doing the work with one another at their table and explaining to one another the workings and the learning goals that we had for them. In my own life, the year that I learned more about English than any other year was the first year I had to teach English. I was at Bishop Hendricken. I had 165 students assigned to me, and I had to teach them grammar. I learned grammar better than anybody that year because I had to explain it over and over again all day long. And I still remember those things. And there's a lot to be said, and a lot of the professional development I've done and led since then through the University of Pittsburgh and other places had a lot to do with what they call accountable talk. We need to hold the kids accountable to talk it out. That's the best way to learn. And this physics program, for instance, is formatted on about 15 minutes of direct instruction using a smartboard, followed by kids sitting at round tables. They don't want you to have desks in the room. They want you to have round tables where the kids are solving problems and explaining to one another at the table how to solve the problem. Once they have a consensus amongst them, and they can argue about why this is right, then they register a response with a clicker. And right on that smart board, the teacher will see, okay, 75% of you picked the answer B, 25 picked A. Let's talk about the 25 that picked A. Why? So kids are always reasoning out, whether it's with a partner at the table, whether it's with the teacher in the front of the room, and the teacher's overseeing it. Okay, some of you picked the wrong answer, so I need to hear your rationale, and let's try to figure out as a class where you went wrong. If I find out that 100% of the kids got it right, okay, let's move on to the next one. We've learned what we need to learn, you see. So, but a big part of that equation is getting the kids actively involved. The second part of your question had to do with the evaluation system, the old one compared to the new.
Whether you were satisfied with the old one and what, I mean.
I was not satisfied with the old one. The old tool that we had in our district, I was okay with the process, but the tool that we used was very vague. There was not a lot of writing on this instrument. And so I'm more used to, where I was at Charahoe, they had a rubric-based system of evaluation. And so there was a lot of writing on this tool. And what that did is it gave a lot of language about, okay, you should be seeing the following kinds of things. Engaged students. You should see a teacher who's organized. You should so it gave you a lot of cues so that a teacher using that instrument would know, okay, I'm going to use this as a checklist. I need to be doing all of these kinds of things on a regular basis in my classroom. And an evaluator could go in there and say, I need to be looking for these things. If you don't have them on the paper, it makes it a lot harder to, well, that kind of looks good, but there may be a whole bunch of other features that you're not even focusing on because there really isn't a cue from the tool that you're using. So this new tool that is being given to us is a very good one. I like that a lot. What I'm a little worried about is making sure that we go through the process appropriately. It's going to be new to everybody, so we need to do it right, and we need to keep a regular communication with our teachers union about that. We already have some meetings already in place, and part of the process is to have an appeals committee, kind of an oversight committee, and I would like that to include administrators and teachers to check in with the community all year long, and for many years, and to not only find out what's going right and what's going wrong, what are the concerns that we're hearing from the principals and from the teachers in terms of this process, but also if there is a conflict about the way something was written on an evaluation or the approach that was taken or the timing of how things happen, that sort of thing, that it should be, there is an appeals process in this district and it's overseen by the administration, but I'm okay with allowing some input in that process from teachers, still holding the ultimate, grievance procedure to go through administration, of course. But along the way, I don't mind getting an opinion from principals and teachers together working in a group who oversee the process. I think that's a fair way to go.
Mrs. Benson.
In reference to the question that was raised about concerning vocational education,
Yes.
I like and I'm very pleased, not as a school committee person, but as a citizen, to hear you say that you're working on a relationship and making use of the facilities that we do have in Quonset. We have everything there from fish packing, which is related to oceanography, to medical buildings. And if we could get that relationship with all the other things that would be involved, insurances, liabilities, and so forth, it would be a great thing for us in this town, and it would also serve as a feeder for those companies when they needed employees, even in the lower skills and the higher skills. We have Job Lot, and we all know what we mean by Job Lot. They hire 700 employees. They are next to Electric Boat. Mm-hmm. and which would mean it wouldn't be, I couldn't see as much liability with a student learning how to pack crates, take numbers, as it would be for a student learning to use a welding torch. So, thank you for looking into those things, and also thank you for considering Torrey. And what I've gleaned, I have no other comments for the night, Madam President, if I can
That's
use
fine.
my time now. What I have gleaned and learned from all of your questions and what you have impressed on me as a person that the citizens chose to represent them. You are a person, and we would be fortunate because your philosophy, if I'm wrong, correct me, is for lifelong learners. Lifelong learners. And not so much test takers, but knowing how to take tests.
Well, I feel like we need to have tests. We need to assess what we do.
That's right.
I think those tests need to be fair ones, and we need to be, our teachers and our students need to be knowledgeable about what's going to be on them for everything, all the testing conditions to be fair. But I always need to respond when people say you're just teaching to the test. I think we all teach to a test. Every teacher out there has in their head what kids need to learn and how I'm going to test it at the end of the week. And if all of this is about quadratic equations, but I'm teaching them geometry instead, I'm not doing them any favor. I need to teach them to the test. And so but I understand the concern about state tests. They seem obviously they're very impersonal. They seem to be very detached from what we do on a regular basis. And so school districts need to do more to learn from how those tests are structured, because they're structured by all of us. Our own teachers in the state of Rhode Island get involved in making those tests. So we're a part of it. But every teacher in every classroom needs to be aware of how they're made, what they're based on, so they can organize their classroom in such a way and organize their own assessments so that they look and feel like the state assessments, if particularly at the high school level where the state assessment matters for graduation. We're not doing any kid a favor by not teaching to that test. And I know that it always has negative connotations, that phrase, but when you really think about it, if you're not teaching to the test that you're going to give the kids, you're not doing them a favor. So I just need to watch out for that phrase. You see what I mean?
To back up my statement.
Yeah.
Yes, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Mudge, so.
Oh, okay. Well,
Go ahead. No, I'm saying you continue.
okay. And I will yield any other time that I have to other members. To back up what I said about lifelong learners and test takers, I mentioned, and and it rings true with me, that every child should know how to take a test. And that would come into his educational instruction day by day in the classroom. And speaking of No Child Left Behind, I happened to listen at a forum the other night where Secretary of Dawkins mentioned that he didn't get approval through the last Congress for his recommendations on changes. So he was going to do them on his own because these schools in our country are hung out with No Child Left Behind. So my question is, I hope, and my thoughts are, that he will, and from what you said, I'm sure you will welcome a more personalization of the tests and better support coming from the Department of Education.
I do. I feel, and I've said this in front of this committee before, that there are some real problems with No Child Left Behind. I think the intention of it is very good, but when it was originally conceived back in 2001, 2014 seemed like a long way off. And now that we're right there, Secretary Duncan is learning that if everything goes as planned, we could be looking at 80% of the schools in the United States be listed as not making adequate yearly progress. And I think there are some really good reasons for looking at this, and I don't know all of the details about what Secretary Duncan is trying to do right now, but I certainly agree with that point.
Many of the things.
Just in this past year, North Kingstown has made real impressive gains in terms of special education, and we've noticed that of all the schools that have a rating for this, North Kingstown is the highest in the state. Smaller schools don't have a big enough population to even get a rating, so they're not on the list. But of all the schools that have a rating, North Kingstown is the highest one in the state, and yet we got a black mark on our record for special education, even though we went up significantly, and we have the best score of any reporting in the state. So all those other schools got knocked back a peg because of that as well. And so, but there wasn't a headline in any paper saying that no high school or no school district in the state has passed for special ed, because only a few of them actually got reported because of the size of the testing sample. So those kinds of things are problematic to me.
Mr. Mudge.
Mr. Mudge.
Just a comment on what Mrs. Benson said. I hate the word teaching to the test. I look at it more as you're teaching to the subject matter. You're teaching to math or physics or quadratic equations, something like that.
Sure.
I think that's really more an appropriate way to me, to articulate that.
With very particular goals for
Right.
your lesson.
Sure,
Right. Mhm.
sure. There's several items on here that kind of overlap. 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, and basically they're centered on basically finances that, really ultimately involve the town council and that side of the government. What do you think that we need to do to improve our relationship with the committee to join in and improve the consolidation efforts, and/or what do you think you might need to do to have better communications with the town manager or the councilman? Do you have any ideas you think you'd like to implement?
For starters, I need to talk with them.
Right.
And that sounds like a very simple thing, but I think it's probably the most important thing. And in the 2 weeks that I've had the interim job, I've already set up a regular lunch, if you will, with Mike Embry. We just happened to run into each other a couple of times over at Jitters on our way to work in the morning, and talked about how it would be a nice thing to just, whether it's once a month or once every couple of weeks or something, just to meet, even if we don't even talk shop all that much, but just to have a friendly and productive relationship, so that I don't want it, and I've also extended the same invitation to everybody on the town council, that I would much rather we meet on a regular basis, come to my office, meet over there, whatever is needed, at a time when we're not in the heat of the budget battle and everyone's getting all political and, saying things in the papers and all that. I think there can be a lot done at this time of year when a lot of that is not in the news, for me to understand what the town is forced to deal with, and for the town council members to understand what we're forced to deal with, and start developing an understanding, and so that when I get to a point where I have to advocate for certain things during budget season, they know me, they trust me, I know them, I trust them, and the conversation is much more productive than otherwise. And so
I agree.
that's something that means a lot to me.
Yeah, good.
All right. Last time we met, we voted to have this be about an hour, and we've reached that magical point and then some. I want to remind everybody in the audience that there are comment forms in the back, that if you'd like to give any response back to the committee, these are the same comment forms that were given out at the public forums last week. So if you want to fill those out at all, you don't have to. And then if you could give them to Lorene before tonight.
Madam Chair?
The one other thing I would say is, why don't we go down for each committee member, and if you'd like to either give a closing comment or a closing question, then we'll go ahead and do that, and then we will adjourn.
Can I just
Mudge.
ask, are we going to give, maybe I fell asleep on this, Dr. Ogier. How about at 20? Do you have any questions, really, of the committee? Do we hit touch
We have
base?
not hit that. If that would...
Yeah, I think we
how
ought to
about
give
if you-
him a...
Since you're the last person here, Mr. Mudge, why don't you ask that? And we'll go down, and like I said, if Mr. Wells has a question, and then we'll go down the table, but since you're the last person here, I think that would be appropriate for you to ask Mr. Mudge.
Have any
So-
questions, Doctor?
You know, I don't have any questions, but I like the way that Mrs. Benson's question came out a little earlier when she asked what the school committee could do for me. I think that was kind of a point that I think I was happy to get that opportunity to address that. That's probably how I would kind of end the interview. But I think I know all of you well enough over these 2 years to have a sense of, you know, what you're looking for. And I hope I'm that guy. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about, you know, I like the idea of being very open about this. A lot of times, school committees or school districts may choose their leadership through a search committee, which is an open process, but it isn't quite as open as this one. And this gives me an opportunity to share my vision. So I see it as a really good opportunity to get this started. So thank you.
Well, if there is nothing else, thank you very much, Dr. Ogier.
Thank you very much.
I'll take a motion to adjourn into executive session.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.